What if Tony Iommi was a folk rock player? What if Eddie Van Halen donned the makeup? Or what if one of the greatest rock duos of all time never came together at all? It sounds unthinkable, but these moments in classic rock history nearly happened. And if they had, well, everything we know about rock music could have looked completely different. So strap in, because today we're counting down 5 times classic rock history almost changed forever. Let's kick things off with the godfather of heavy metal himself, Tony Iommi. Back in 1968, before the doom-laden riffs of Iron Man and War Pigs ever saw the light of day, Iommi joined Jethro Tull. Yes, you heard that right. The flute-toting, waistcoat-wearing prog folk rockers. Martin Barr, who ended up getting the gig as the band's guitarist, spoke to me in 2023 and confirmed the story.
They had a short list of me, Tony Iommi, I think Mick Taylor. They went for Tony. Tony didn't particularly meld with the music. Didn't suit him. He wasn't comfortable.
Iommi even played with Jethro Tull during a TV special. There's footage of him on stage, stone-faced, clearly not in his element. His time in the band didn't last though, and he left Tull almost immediately. And just months later, he was back in Birmingham, channeling darkness and distortion into a new project called Earth, soon to be renamed Black Sabbath. Had he stayed in Tull? Well, maybe Sabbath never forms, and maybe, just maybe, Jethro Tull's 1989 Grammy win for Best Metal Performance suddenly makes a lot more sense. Next up, what if Robert Plant never fronted Led Zeppelin? Well, it could have happened because Jimmy Page originally offered the singer gig to a guy named Terry Reid, a powerhouse vocalist in his own right. And if you've never listened to him, then please do check out his solo work. His nickname is Superlungs for a reason. Anyway, Terry Reid turned it down so he could tour alongside the Rolling Stones, but he didn't leave Jimmy Page empty-handed. He made a suggestion and helped to form the band, as he told me when I interviewed him last year.
I said to him, I said, look, you get Robert singing, but for God's sake, do not listen to the drummer, John Bonham. John Bonham is going to be the anchor of the group.
And boom! Zeppelin's core lineup was born. Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, John Paul Jones, John Bonham. But imagine if Reid had said yes. Well, we'd lose that Page-Plant dynamic, obviously, but you'd lose Bonham as well. That's not just a different band, that's a different reality and a different soundtrack to the whole of the 70s. Reid might have been more blues, less bombast, so no Kashmir, no Whole Lot of Love. Maybe Zeppelin becomes a short-lived blues act instead of conquering the world, and the song certainly would never have remained the same. And now on to one of the longest running bands in history, and the real possibility of an explosive frontman being their guitarist. Yes, the powerhouse Steve Marriott was on the Rolling Stones' radar after Brian Jones exited. Keith Richards admired Marriott's raw power and gritty tone, and during the rehearsals the two got on famously. But here's the catch. Marriott was never a sideman. He couldn't be. He had that wild dog energy, amazing on stage, chaotic off it. And according to Marriott's wife, Pam, that's exactly what cost him the gig, as she recalled in his official biography, All Too Beautiful, saying this: "Steve told me I just couldn't keep my mouth shut. Keith wanted him in, but there was no way that once Steve opened his mouth, Mick would have had him in the band. He knew Steve would never stay in the background. 1 Jagger in the band is enough. 2, that's a fight waiting to happen. So they passed, and eventually brought in Ronnie Wood, who fit in like an old pair of snakeskin boots. A killer guitarist and an even better vibe man, and someone who would roll with the Glimmer Twins without trying to outshine them. That decision wasn't just good for band chemistry, it was crucial to the Rolling Stones' longevity. The Jagger-Richards-Wood trio helped carry the band through decades of changes, rehab stints, and cultural shifts. Had Marriott joined, well, the Stones might have burned out instead of fading into their legendary twilight. Who knows, but there'd have been no Some Girls, no Tattoo You, and probably no Endless World tours. As for Ronnie, well, he helped keep the band rolling and stadium ready for another 4 decades. Alright, now let's talk about another big one. Eddie Van Halen wanting to join Kiss. Picture the scene. It was 1982, Van Halen were megastars, but tensions were through the roof and Eddie was fed up with David Lee Roth. So what does he do? Well, when I spoke to Gene Simmons last year, he told me that apparently Eddie wanted to suit up and put on the makeup.
It got so bad for the guys that Eddie called me. We were recording an album called Creatures of the Night. And he came down to the studio and I said, well, let's get out of here. Let's go across the street to a place to grab some coffee or something. And he asked me to join KISS. I can't take Roth anymore. I've got to get out of here. And I think I did the right thing by talking him out of it. Said, no, you've got to rough it out.
Let that sink in. Eddie wanted to quit his own band and put on the makeup. Would Paul and Gene have settled for Eddie stealing the spotlight? Hard to say, but had Eddie jumped? You can kiss goodbye to the whole 1984 album and the entire Van Hagar era. And finally, a moment where fear got in the way of fate. It was late 1967, and Syd Barrett's behaviour grew more unstable. Pink Floyd quietly started thinking about life after their original frontman. They knew they needed someone special, someone with brilliance, presence, and control. And one name kept coming up: Jeff Beck. But no one had the nerve to ask. Drummer Nick Mason later admitted, "We all wanted him, but none of us had the nerve to ask." Jeff Beck in Pink Floyd? It's a bit of a mind-bender. On one hand, his virtuosity could have taken their sound into a new, wild territory. On the other, would he have had the patience for slow builds, spacey jams, and Roger Waters' control issues? Even Gilmour, who did get the gig obviously, once said it would have been explosive, but he might have only lasted 6 months. So instead, the Gilmour era began and Floyd matured. If Beck had joined, maybe the lunatic wouldn't have been on the grass. He'd have been smashing his guitar through it. So there you have it, 5 moments when classic rock history stood at a crossroads. Imagine if Tony Iommi stayed in Tull, if Terry Reid fronted Led Zeppelin, Steve Marriott became a Stone, if Eddie Van Halen joined KISS and Pink Floyd went with Jeff Beck instead of David Gilmour. Is there any turning points in rock that I should have included? Do you think any of these might have worked out for the better? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and hit like if you learned something new, and subscribe for more deep dives and unheard of rock stories right here on VRP Rocks.